welcome to Leaders of Tomorrow. I'm Sunanda Jaiseelan. We're bringing you this very special series that we're calling the Leaders of Tomorrow Awards Conclave, talking about all of the highlights in this episode from our conclave. What did our experts have to say on the overarching theme of survive, revive and thrive for our small businesses? And what advice did they have for our entrepreneurs? All of that on this episode. Take a listen.
Innovation is the key to success. I will always say that. Because you have to come out with certain solutions which are better than what we have been doing so far, or what the whole other people are doing it. And that's where you can add value. If we don't add value to a proposition, we don't progress. And the human race has always innovated. And we are innovating much faster than what we have been innovating in past.
Sir, I'll start with the theme. Our theme for this season and Leaders of Tomorrow happens to be India's largest entrepreneurial platform. It's a daily show. This year, in this season, we felt that because of the sheer intensity of the economic crisis that we went through, it's very important that, the economy, the industrialists, and basically all of us, we survive. At some stage, we think of revival, and then we think of growth, or I would say thriving, So, what is your assessment at this stage? Where are we on that economic spectrum? Obviously, we have survived. We have seen the latest GDP data, which indicates that we are bouncing back probably faster than expected. What is your assessment?
So good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me here. Obviously, the last 18 months have been tricky, to say the least. Worldwide, we've come up with, we were hit by a pandemic that has changed life in very fundamental ways. And not surprisingly, this has been difficult times for businesses, big and small, but particularly for small businesses. Now, where are we with this? Well, last year, as you will remember, we went through a lockdown. Now, when we did the lockdown, it's not as if we did not know it was going to be particularly harsh. But remember, we did not know in April, May, June of 2020 exactly what the nature of this disease was. We didn't have virtually no information on it. And so we did a lockdown, perhaps a harsh lockdown, but I think that was the right thing to do, because in some ways it gave us the time to put in place quarantining facilities, testing facilities, and gather information basically about what this disease was about. So at that time, the best we could do was to hedge for the very worst outcome. I mean, assume the worst and hedge for it. But over time, as we have become more confident with understanding this disease, we have opened things up. And in fact, in the 2 quarters, from October to March, the economy actually revived quite strongly, if you will remember. Then we were hit by the second wave. Obviously, there was a fairly large health cost to it in the months of April and May, even into June, I would say. However, the economic cost of it was smaller, because we had decentralized the quarantining facilities rather than do a national lockdown. And this was the right thing to do, because you have to have a sort of dynamic feedback loop to be able to do lockdowns as things move. But the economic stress on that was less, at least on manufacturing type or non-contact services. However, it was pretty harsh, again, on contact services, travel and tourism, in particular, restaurants, things like that. Many of you run those kinds of businesses. Clearly, we had no choice about that. Again, as things have stabilized, we have opened those up. The good news is that wherever we are able to open up a sector, demand seems to come back quite strongly. So there are still restrictions, by the way, on things like international travel and so on. So we have not opened everything up. But the good news is, wherever we can open things up, demand doesn't seem to be the major constraint. In fact, globally, contrary to what many experts would have predicted, supply-side restrictions are the serious issue. For example, non-availability of containers or non-availability of chips, for example, and so on. So there are some disruptions which are causing problems, but they are not demand-side problems. Now, looking ahead, let me say that demand is coming back wherever we open things up. And very importantly, we have quite a lot of resources, particularly fiscal resources, to be able to pump it up further if necessary. Exports are doing exceptionally well. We're having record exports, even compared to the pre-COVID period. FDI is strong. Foreign exchange reserves are at all-time highs. And while we did have a bit of a spike in inflation, it seems to be petering out and doesn't seem to be spiraling out at all, which means that our monetary conditions, while at some point I'm sure we will tighten them, but for now we can keep them quite easy. So we have the space here for sort of accelerating growth quite strongly. Obviously, we all remain careful about a possible third wave. The vaccination program is going well. I'm told today we may have done as many as 20 million jabs, which is non-trivial. And if we don't get a third wave, then I am quite confident that not only will we have GDP growth well in the double digits this year, which will obviously benefit from a lower base of last year, but I think we could be in momentum for a double-digit growth well into next year as well. So very good growth momentum.
Right. Anand, my next question is to you. You represent an industry which happens to be a bellwether about the economic health. And obviously, we did see the worst situation for the industry probably in more than a decade. So what was your experience? And currently, from industry point of view, is worst behind us? Is that what you believe?
Yeah, thanks, Mihir. So I think, when you look at media and the performance of media from our point of view, advertising is a composite of the hope and confidence that all industry who is operating in a market has on their own future. Because if they think there is sales that is possible, then only they advertise. So we look at advertising as a lead indicator of what the next 2 to 3 months are going to be. Now, in this, in this perspective or context, if you look at the way the waves have been in terms of the infections, number of cases, deaths, tests, etc., then the wave has a certain type of a format. I mean, it would be a wave of, I think the peak was 1 lakh cases. Then the second wave was, I think the peak was around 4.5 lakh cases. And maybe the third wave or even a fourth wave would be of, say, it's said that it is in the range of about 1 lakh of cases in the third wave and so on and so forth. So you will have either equal or even larger waves, in the subsequent period. But when you look at the way the economy has behaved or the ad trend has been, it actually has been that the first wave, which was much smaller than the second wave, has had a much larger impact on advertising. And that is not only because we had a prolonged lockdown, it is also because since we did not know much about it, and since we had a larger lockdown period, people discussed this a lot more within themselves and in media. So the story wave was larger in the first wave, which led to the economy being hit more in the first wave, much more than the second wave. I personally believe that while there may be clinical waves of corona, and that will be there, I think, I don't know whether you guys know, the common cold started somewhere in the late 19th century with a pandemic which started in Russia, I think, and it is also a coronavirus, and we carry it through without even realizing. Everybody gets a common cold. So this coronavirus, SARS-2 or whatever we want to call it, COVID-19, is going to be there with us for the next decades. I mean, definitely all the people in this room will, the corona is going to be there beyond our lifetimes and maybe for the next 100 years or more. So just like H1N1 still comes every year and goes. Nobody talks about it. So when you talk about it is when the economy is going to sort of have an impact. I'm not saying therefore that the deaths and the disease management should not be there. I mean, it's obviously way more than an H1N1. But I think the third wave, which is expected to apparently come last quarter of this year, this calendar year, in my opinion, is going to get blunted by the festive, and it will be a shorter, maybe a 1 month period. And therefore, I don't think the economy is going to see, a 2020 kind of an impact, or even those 2 months kind of an impact in the so-called third wave that is expected to come, or the fourth wave that will come next year.
It's time for a quick break. We're back in just a moment. Just stay tuned. Welcome back. You're with us here on the Leaders of Tomorrow Awards and Conclave special series, bringing you highlights of all the big voices and names who joined us for our conclave. Take a listen.
Now, Sanjeev, you made an important point that so many things have happened across the sectors, be it PLI schemes, be it support to the MSMEs, agriculture. You know, a lot of things have happened which otherwise wouldn't have happened. So, in a way, government has used this crisis as an opportunity to push through a lot of reforms. I mean, labor reforms of all things, you know. So, if you can just give us an overview, because like you rightly said, in pockets, everybody has understood that something has happened in their own sector. But when we look at the larger picture, you know, what happens next when that thrive stage kicks in?
So I think the key thing to understand is that we in the government are quite clear that the post-COVID world is not just a reinflation of the pre-COVID world. This is an important thing to understand. Now, what exactly will happen in this is difficult to tell because it will have its own geopolitics, its own technology. I'm quite sure consumer behavior has changed. All kinds of things have changed. I can't predict exactly how it will be. So how do you prepare for a complete uncertainty of this new environment, especially when geopolitics itself is becoming quite important and supply chains are changing and so on? So what we have done is, first and foremost, we have done a bunch of supply-side measures to open things up, to allow innovation, changing, flexibility, resilience. And so this is key. So I'll give you some examples. We used to have a very, very restrained geospatial and cartography sector. Basically, the Survey of India used to be a monopolist. Technically, you had all these restrictions that every map had to be okayed by the Survey of India. Even though Google Maps was in everybody's phone, it was technically illegal till March. We have opened that sector up completely, and there are a gazillion new uses and new startups who have started in the geospatial cartography sector. Drones, similarly. Just 2 weeks ago, completely new drones policy. It's one of the most liberal drones policy. Many people told us, oh, there's security problems and so on. Sure, I mean, we have tried to mitigate them at the edges, but fact is, this is going to be a huge sector. It's going to change all kinds of things, not to mention urban transportation. I mean, maybe in a few years I'll come to this event in a drone taxi. Or maybe Bharat Sarkar will actually have its own equivalent of a drone official car. I don't know. But I'm just pointing out to you, there are all these small sectors. Since this has got a lot of MSMEs here, we used to have, for entirely inexplicable reasons, restrictions on factoring of invoices as a way of getting working capital. Entire sector has been opened up. It's great for MSMEs. They can get money on their receivable invoices. And it creates a brand new business for the NBFC sector. There used to be these bizarre, outdated telecom regulations on the BPO, IT, ES sector. Again, for reasons that are entirely inexplicable. But anyway, so, we've gotten rid of them. They're gone. In 2 waves, we got rid of them. So we also had a second wave of reforms on this particular one, once in November, and then again in, I think, June, I think we got rid of them. So I'm giving you a whole bunch of these sectoral reforms. So there are obviously these big framework reforms, such as GST, insolvency and bankruptcy code, labor reforms, even farm reforms. But I think where we are really getting momentum here are these nuts and bolts sectoral reforms. And people outside their sector do not realize what we have done. But in those sectors, if you ask people, you will know these are radical, radical reforms. Entire new sectors have been created. And by the way, if anybody can find another one in the audience here and can think of some regulation that is getting in the way of a brand new sector emerging, please tell me. We are out there looking for them, and we'll open them up.
Right. What happens in third wave of reforms? Let's not talk about the virus, but third wave of reforms.
So I think the third wave of reforms, so the first wave of reforms in some ways is the, what do you call, the framework reforms. These are reforms which build frameworks for functioning of a modern 21st century economy. So they were like GST. or insolvency and bankruptcy code, Aadhaar, labor reforms, and so on. These are the big reforms. The second wave of reforms, which we are doing right now, these are these sectoral reforms that I mentioned, But together, I would say they are still about, both of them are still about essentially withdrawing the Indian state from the things it should not do. They're about deregulation, monetization, privatization. It's in a sense of withdrawal of the Indian state and stop it from getting in everybody's way. The next round of reforms, which I would argue would happen longer term, maybe over decades, has got to do with getting the Indian state to do the things it should be doing. So first we get rid of it from things it should not be doing. Now it should do the things it should be doing. So what are those things? I think the top of that list has got to be the delivery of justice and the enforcement of contracts. So this is not just of the government. It's something it has to do in partnership with the judiciary. But in my list of things that the Indian state should deliver is timely enforcement of contracts. This has got to be really important. We can't be a modern economy with 40 million cases stuck in the judicial system. So this is very, very critical. Other things that needs to do? Well, municipal services. When we were younger, maybe 30 years ago when I was at university, I used to think that, yeah, sure, our cities are run down, bad infrastructure, blah, blah, blah. Wherever we talk about delivering world-class infrastructure, somebody somewhere, some activist or somebody in the newspapers will write a column, this is not appropriate. Why do you expect, what will the poor do with world-class infrastructure? There is a thinking that somehow the poor don't know what to do with world-class infrastructure. Whereas, in fact, the rich are rich basically because they have access to world-class infrastructure. That's the source of the richness. So if you give the poor access to world-class infrastructure, they'll also become rich. So build world-class infrastructure in the poorer parts of the country, eastern UP, northeast, in Orissa, and so on. And watch what happens. I can assure you the amazing innovations and entrepreneurship that will suddenly pop up in all these parts of the country.
At ET now, our ethos are also in line with, we genuinely believe that India can rise if, all Indians improve their, lifestyle. So Rise with India is a strong belief. Now, everything that Sanjeev has mentioned, that plus the sheer population, the middle class, probably one of the largest in a couple of years from now, if all of that put together, are you really hoping for this so-called rise to actually happen in our lifetime?
Yeah, I think in the next 10 years, I think what this 20s is to India is what the 90s was to China. The one way or the other, there is no question. I don't see any reason, and all indicators, at least from our industry point of view and the way consumers have changed, is that, and I think honestly, for small businesses, for middle-sized businesses, and the economy as a whole, over 10, 15 years, we will look back and say these 2 years actually was good for the country, because a lot of things which were not really working had to be broken faster than they otherwise would have happened in the normal churn process. And a lot of things that you were wary to adopt because you didn't need to, because the existing way of life was already there, had to be pushed away and a new way of life had to be adopted. The only problem that I think we'll have over the next 2 to 3 years is, you have had a certain stance, and I'm talking of people, whether they are entrepreneurs, executives, employed people, unorganized people, etc. We've had a certain way of life till 2020 March. And that is what everybody is scrambling to come back to, which is never going to happen. That is something that people in this room have realized. Some of us who are able to still sit here and talk have obviously realized that's why we are all here. But everybody has not survived. Those people who have not survived will need some hand-holding in the meanwhile, or somebody at home usually sort of, fills in. If the father doesn't, is not capable, suddenly the son steps in. And one fundamental thing that has happened, which Vaidhi also said in his lecture, is unless you go digital, there is no way that you are going to be able to survive the next 2 years, forget the next 10 years. And the good thing is, there is a large bunch of people in India, and most of them all here in this room, and a large bunch of people in India, and the demographic that we, actually the larger part of our demographic is way more digitally savvy and way more digital adopted already, and that I think is what's going to drive us. And in every business, whether it is selling garments or shoes or food, the whole D2C e-commerce thing that is coming up, which is almost taking out people who were in jobs, sort of starting to do that in villages, in cities, is what I think is going to create that whole groundswell of enterprise, feel good, better products, revenue, etc. And I think I'm very confident that 2030 is going to be way better than what 2020 was.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sanjeev, for joining us on this discussion. Thank you so much, Anand.
That's all we could manage to put into tonight's episode. But if you want to know who the grand winners are of the Leaders of Tomorrow Awards and Conclave, well, that's coming up on the rest of the special series. Do stay tuned for that. For tonight, it's a wrap. Thanks for watching.